Oh my God. The cup shattered against the marble floor and the scent of roasted beans mingled with the sterile crispness of moneyed air. Abraham Reed, standing beneath a crystal chandelier in his $3.5 million luxury boutique, locked eyes with a ghost. But she wasn't dead. No, she was very much alive and wearing diamond studs, a Burberry trench coat, and a look of complete disbelief. He'd seen that face before, not in person, not like this, but in a tattered photograph he'd kept hidden in his wallet since he was 8 years old. The woman in front of him, elegant, affluent, invisibly shaken, was the exact image he had stared at for decades. And somehow, impossibly, she was here, in his store. At 32, Abraham Reed wasn't easily rattled. He'd built one of Chicago's most exclusive luxury boutiques from scratch, Reed Luxury Emporium, catering to clients who didn't blink at dropping six figures on a single shopping spree. Everything about the store was curated, from the imported Italian marble floors to the vintage baccarat vases. Control was his currency, image his armor. But right now, standing in front of the woman who had once given him life, and as he'd always believed, abandoned him at birth, that armor cracked. His assistant, Alicia, stood awkwardly to the side. "Mr. Reed, should I get someone to clean that up?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. The woman, blonde, emerald eyes, took a tentative step forward, her husband's voice echoing softly beside her. "Clarice. Are you okay, Clarice?" The name hit him like a tidal wave. His name is Abraham Reed, but that was not the name written on the hospital bracelet a social worker gave him long ago. That bracelet, plastic yellowed with barely legible ink, read Baby Boy Sue. Sue, her last name. Clarice's hands trembled as she reached for her purse, then seemed to forget what she was doing. Her lips moved, no sound emerging. Then finally, with a tremor that cracked her polished exterior, she spoke. "Abraham." Hearing his name in her voice triggered something primal. Anger, curiosity, pain. I didn't know," she whispered. Her voice, despite its softness, carried the weight of 25 years. Abraham straightened his tailored suit. Years of boardroom training kicked in, though inside him, something was spiraling. "Mrs. Sue, Mr. Sue," his tone was formal, almost robotic. "Welcome to Reed Luxury Emporium. I believe you had an appointment regarding our private collection." Her husband, Richard, according to the notes, glanced between them, his brow furrowed. "Do you two know each other?" Neither answered. The silence was too loaded for comfort. Alicia, sensing the tension, quickly excused herself, and Richard followed moments later, after Clarice's hushed plea for privacy. That left Abraham alone in the diamond room with the woman who'd haunted his memories for a quarter of a century. The walls felt like they were closing in. "How did you find me?" he asked, his voice low. Clarice blinked rapidly, a tear escaping the corner of her eye. "I didn't," she said. "We just moved here. Richard's company merged with a firm based in Chicago. We were told your store had a rare collection of vintage watches. I had no idea." Abraham clenched his jaw. He didn't know what was worse, that she had walked in by accident or that she'd never looked for him. "You recognize me," he said flatly. "I would know you anywhere," she whispered. "You have your father's face, but your eyes, those are mine." A pause, then a confession. "They told me you died." Abraham's chest tightened. "What?" he whispered. Clarice opened her wallet and pulled out a worn photo, a much younger version of herself, holding a dark-skinned newborn. Written on the back, faded and fragile, "Clarice and Abraham, Day 2. "I was 19, she said, her voice breaking. "They told me you had a heart condition, that you didn't make it through the night. I begged to see you, but I was sedated. I was too weak to fight. I had no one." Abraham's legs felt weak. Everything he'd built, his business, his discipline, his silence, was based on the story that he had been discarded. Now this woman was telling him he was stolen. He didn't know if he believed her. But one thing was certain, the story he'd lived with his whole life had just cracked open, and behind it was a truth far more dangerous and personal than he could have ever imagined. "Someone told you I died," he repeated, eyes locked on hers. "And I want to know who." The coffee stain on the carpet spread slowly, like an unspoken truth unraveling in plain sight. Abraham stood still, arms crossed over his chest, as Clarice Sue sat on the velvet sofa in the private showroom, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The room, usually a haven for luxury deals and silent negotiation, now held something much more volatile. Silence. Not the quiet of exclusivity, but the choking kind. the kind that followed trauma, the kind that demanded anyone say something. I want to start by saying I'm sorry, Clarissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I know that's not enough. He didn't reply. She looked around the pristine space, her gaze falling on the platinum watches, the imported crystal. You've built something extraordinary. I had to, Abraham said flatly. Some of us don't get second chances. Clarice flinched. He didn't enjoy it, but he couldn't help it either. The wall he'd built for 25 years wasn't going to come down with one apology. They said you died, she repeated almost to herself. A doctor, he told me there had been a complication. Something with your heart. Except there wasn't. Abraham cut in. There was nothing wrong with me. I've seen my medical file. Her eyes snapped up. How I've been looking for answers since I was old enough to spell the word abandonment. The system has holes, but not enough to hide everything. He took a breath, forced his voice steady. You never came for me. Clarice reached into her purse, pulled out a folded, faded document. I tried, she said softly. After I recovered, I went to the hospital, asked for records. They told me nothing existed, that the birth and death had already been filed. Why would they lie? I don't know. I was young alone. My parents had cut me off. And when they said you'd been buried, I broke. Abraham stared at her. She looked nothing like the woman in his memories. That woman was a cold silhouette, a myth, a ghost who chose her own comfort over her son. But this woman in front of him, she was trembling. Real. Human. Do you remember naming me? He asked, voice low. Clarice nodded. Abraham Nicholas Sue, after your father. The name hit him like a blow to the chest. Nicholas. No one in the foster system had ever said a word about his father. I've never heard his name before today, he admitted. Clarice's eyes glistened. You look just like him. A beat passed. Then Abraham asked the question that had haunted him for decades. Why didn't you fight harder? Clarice's response was immediate. I didn't know how. And in that raw honesty, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a fracture in the wall between them. A crack where light and maybe truth might begin to enter. For most of his life, Abraham had rehearsed this moment in his head, dozens of versions, endless what-ifs. In some he screamed. In others, he walked away. But never in any of those imaginary confrontations did he sit silently across from the woman who named him and whispered, I didn't know how. Now he wasn't sure if he wanted to cry or collapse. Clarice reached into her bag again, her movements slow, almost ceremonial. This time she pulled out a small photograph frayed at the edges, its surface dulled with age. I only had one picture of you, she said, voice wavering. They let me hold you once. 2 days after you were born, you were wrapped in this yellow blanket, your eyes barely open. Abraham took the photo from her hands. It was surreal, his newborn face nestled against the chest of a much younger Clarice, her hair pulled back, eyes exhausted but glowing. He'd always believed no such moment existed, that no one had held him, that he'd entered the world alone and unwanted. I memorized every inch of your face, Clarice said, but they took you back so fast. Then, they said you were gone, he swallowed hard, and you never questioned it. I was 19, sedated, broke. My family had turned their backs. When someone in a white coat tells you your baby didn't make it, what choice do you think I had? Abraham stood pacing now. I lived in 7 foster homes, he said, his voice sharper. 2 of them were good. 1 was violent. 1 was worse. I stopped counting birthdays when I was 11, but I still remembered that photo. Clarice's face fell. What photo? He pulled out his wallet, opened the secret flap that hadn't changed since he was a boy. The same picture he'd carried for nearly 25 years, Clarice holding a baby just like the one she'd handed him moments ago. I got it from a social worker when I was 8. She didn't want to give it to me, said it might make things worse, but I begged her. Clarice reached out, fingers trembling. You kept it all this time. It was the only proof I had that someone had once wanted me. Abraham said, then stopped. Or so I thought. There was a long silence between them, thick with everything unsaid. I thought I was the one who was discarded. Abraham said, finally staring at the photo. But maybe we were both stolen. Clarice looked up, stunned. What do you mean? Abraham met her eyes. What if this wasn't a mistake or negligence? What if someone made sure we were separated? On purpose. The idea had been a whisper in the back of his mind ever since Sandra's initial search turned up inconsistencies. Now it was gaining volume. Clarice's lips parted in shock. "But who would, I don't know," Abraham said quietly. "But I'm going to find out. Because when a man spends his life looking for the truth and finally comes face to face with it, it's not always a reunion. Sometimes it's a reckoning." The room had fallen into an uneasy quiet, the kind that follows emotional earthquakes, but always hides aftershocks. Clarice sat still, her eyes fixed on the photo Abraham had handed back. She studied it like she was searching for the years that had slipped through her fingers. Abraham leaned against the display table behind him, arms crossed, trying to push back the flood in his chest. "I didn't just name you after your father," Clarice finally said. "He wanted it. He said, if it's a boy, it's Abraham. Strong. Timeless." Abraham looked up. "Nicholas." She nodded. "Nicholas Brownall. He was in medical school 3rd year. Prepping for rotations, staying up all night studying. Brilliant. Black, and apparently unacceptable." Her voice caught at the last word. "My parents hated him," she said flatly. "The moment they saw us together, it was war. When I told them I was pregnant, they gave me a plane ticket and a check and told me never to come back." Abraham absorbed this in silence. "They wanted me to terminate," Clarice added quietly. "But I wouldn't. Nicholas was thrilled, said he'd figure it out. We were going to get married after he graduated." Her hands moved toward her purse again, this time with purpose. She pulled out a small velvet box. "I was going to give you this later, maybe at dinner, or maybe I never would have. But it's his." She opened it. Inside was a simple gold ring worn thin by time. A modest diamond sat at the center, nothing flashy, nothing loud, but it pulsed with history. Nicholas had bought it with his first stipend from med school. That's what she said anyway. Abraham didn't need to question it. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. He stared at the ring. "You kept this all these years," Clarice gave a shaky nod. "It was the only thing that felt like proof that he existed, that you existed, that it hadn't all been a fever dream." Abraham reached forward gently, taking the box. The weight of it in his hand was heavier than it looked. "My father never knew about me?" he asked. "No," Clarice said, tears rising. "He died 2 months before you were born. A drunk driver hit him while he was walking home from the hospital. He never got to meet you." Abraham closed the box carefully, then looked at her. "And after I was born, I hemorrhaged. They said it was bad. I was unconscious for hours. When I woke up, a man in a white coat told me, 'You hadn't made it, that your heart had stopped, that they had taken care of the burial.' No body, no paperwork, just finality." Abraham felt a coldness settle in his spine. "They told you I died," he repeated, "and they told the system you gave me up voluntarily." Clarice blinked. "What?" "That's what my file said," Abraham explained. "White mother. Father unknown. Infant surrendered after 72 hours. Clarice's head shook, slow and fierce. "No, I never signed anything. I never would have." Something in Abraham's gut twisted. "Then someone forged your name," he said, "and someone made sure we'd never see each other again." He didn't know who, not yet, but he knew this: when you fake a child's death, you don't just bury a baby, you bury the truth. And someone out there had a shovel in their hand. The next morning, the sunlight over Chicago was sharp and cold, slicing through the skyline like truth through a well-crafted lie. Abraham sat at the long glass table in his penthouse, the velvet ring box still unopened beside his laptop. He hadn't slept. Not really. The night had been a tangle of flashbacks, half-memories, and burning questions. His phone buzzed Sandra. She was meticulous, discreet, the kind of person who spoke in facts, not feelings. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice brisk but cautious. "I found something, but it doesn't add up." He straightened in his chair. "Go on." "There are 2 sets of documents," Sandra said. "One is a death certificate for a male infant filed under Abraham Sue, dated the same week you were born. The other is a live birth record, same name, same birth date, no notation of death." Abraham's pulse quickened. "So the hospital recorded both," he said. "Birth and death, yes. But here's the thing." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The death certificate was processed 3 days after the birth record, and the signature on the death certificate, it's not a physician's." Abraham frowned. "Then who signed it?" Sandra exhaled. "A hospital administrator. Victor Sanchez." For a long moment, Abraham said nothing. The room felt heavier, smaller. I thought that name might mean something to you, Sandra added. Oh, it meant something. Victor Sanchez wasn't just anyone. He was Abraham's first major investor. A man who'd seemingly appeared out of nowhere praising Abraham's grit and vision. He'd opened doors, introduced him to high society clients, backed Reed luxury when banks laughed in Abraham's face. And now it seemed Victor had signed off on his death. Send me everything, Abraham said, voice tight. Every document. Every version. I already did, Sandra replied. But there's more. I ran the name through some archived hospital board records. Victor wasn't just an admin, he was on the board. At the time of your birth. A silence stretched between them. You were never abandoned, Mr. Reed, she said gently. You were erased. And whoever did the erasing was still very much alive. Abraham had spent years perfecting his ability to read people in business and negotiations in boardrooms full of liars and silk. But when the woman behind the door looked at him, he didn't need to read her. Her face said it all. She knew exactly who he was. Beatrice Porter, he asked. She hesitated, half hiding behind the screen door. Silver hair, thin lips pressed into a line. Her eyes, sharp but weary, darted to the street behind him before settling back on his face. What do you want? Her voice was flat. Not unkind, but guarded. I was born at Lakeside Medical Center 25 years ago. My name is Abraham Reed, he said slowly. I believe you were working in the maternity ward then. For a moment, she didn't move. Then without a word, she tried to close the door. He was faster. Please, he said gently but firmly, I'm not here to make trouble. I just need the truth. A long pause stretched between them. Then slowly she opened the door wider. I've been waiting for this day, she whispered, wondering if it would ever come. The house was modest, old furniture, doilies on the armrests, photos of children and grandchildren along the mantel. Abraham sat on a worn couch while Beatrice lowered herself into a recliner with the kind of care that came from aching bones. It was wrong, she said without preamble. What they did was wrong. I've carried it like a stone in my chest for 25 years. He leaned forward. What happened? Your mother Clarice had complications after delivery. She lost a lot of blood. They rushed her into surgery. Meanwhile, you were taken to the nursery. She paused, her fingers twisted in her lap. You were fine, perfect actually, no issues. But 2 days later, a man came in. Not a doctor, a hospital administrator. Victor Sanchez. The name hit again like a hammer now, not a whisper. He came with Dr. Milner, told the nurses to log a death. Heart defect, they said, but none of us had seen anything wrong. Why would they lie? Beatrice shook her head. Back then, money, power. Mr. Sanchez was untouchable. He made big donations, sat on the board. Rumors were he and his wife were trying to adopt and kept getting rejected. Abraham's chest went tight. So you're saying he took me? No, Beatrice said, confusion flickering. You didn't go home with him. You went into the foster system. I checked. I had to know. That's how I knew your name. That didn't make sense. Why steal a child just to let him vanish into the system? There's more, she said, her voice dropping. A week later, a woman was admitted to the psych unit. Tina Sanchez. She'd lost a baby 7 months along. But she wasn't the mother. She was the surrogate, for who Abraham asked, though his heart already knew. Beatrice's eyes held his. Victor's stepdaughter, a woman named Olga. The room felt suddenly colder. Because if what she said was true, then Abraham hadn't just been taken. He'd been targeted. The event was held in a private gallery overlooking Lake Michigan. A curated affair, art, jazz, old money. Abraham knew the crowd well. It was his world now. Victor Sanchez spotted him first. Abraham, he beamed, cutting through the room like he owned it. Always a pleasure. Abraham extended his hand, firm, controlled. Victor, thanks for the invite. Victor clapped his shoulder like they were old friends. I hear big things are happening. Europe. Expansion. You're making waves, my boy. Abraham smiled, thin and polite. I've had help. Only from those who saw your potential, early, Victor said smoothly. Never forget who backed you when no one else would. The words landed heavier than they should have. You were on the board at Lakeside Medical, weren't you? Abraham asked casually. Victor blinked, just a fraction too long. Why do you ask? Abraham sipped his drink. Just came across some old hospital documents. Your name popped up. Surprised me. Victor's smile never faltered, but the warmth behind his eyes vanished. Ancient history. I've served on many boards, hospitals, banks, foundations. Of course, Abraham said. Still, amazing how the past has a way of showing up. Victor leaned in, voice lower now. Some things are better left buried, Abraham. Focus on your future. That's where the real power is. Abraham held his gaze, unless the past was buried alive. And in that instant, Abraham knew Victor wasn't just hiding something. He was warning him. The email had no subject line, no sender name, just a single attachment. Video 0625 SWAT TS at MP4. Abraham clicked it, heart thudding in his chest. The screen flickered. Then a hospital room appeared, dimly lit, sterile. A frail woman sat upright in bed, wrapped in a pale blue robe. Her hair was silver but neatly combed. A nurse adjusted a pillow off-screen, then left. She looked into the camera straight at him. "My name is Tina Sanchez," she said. Her voice was soft but clear, measured. "And if you're watching this, Abraham, then they haven't silenced me yet." He froze. Clarice leaned forward beside him, hand gripping his tightly. "I am your grandmother, not by blood, but by betrayal," Tina continued. "They've kept me here in isolation for over 15 years. Told the world I died. Why? Because I knew what they did to you." Her eyes watered, but she held steady. "Victor orchestrated the entire lie, the forged documents, the separation from your mother, the adoption scheme. You were meant to be his pawn, his ticket to controlling my estate through a manufactured bloodline." Abraham couldn't breathe. But something changed. You weren't adopted. They lost control, and so they waited, until you were successful enough to matter. And now they're circling again. Tina coughed long and strained. She reached beside her, holding up a small brass key. "There's a safe at the lake house. My personal ledger is inside. The code is your real birthday." She looked directly into the lens. "You were never forgotten. You were stolen. And now you deserve to know why." The screen went black. Silence fell over the room like snowfall. Clarice covered her mouth, tears welling. "She's alive." Abraham stared at the monitor. The woman everyone thought was dead had just lit the match, and now the fire couldn't be stopped. Victor's voice, as always, was smooth as silk. "Abraham, my boy," he said over the phone, "we really should talk face to face like family." Abraham let the silence hang. Victor continued unfazed. "How about dinner tonight? My treat. Caravaggio's 7 €. Just us, no pressure. Clarice and Richard are welcome too. I believe you've all, reconnected recently." There it was, the smile behind the teeth. Abraham's jaw tightened. "I'll see what I can do." He ended the call without another word. Clarice looked at him tense. "He knows. He always knows," Abraham replied. "That's what makes him dangerous." Later that evening, they arrived at Caravaggio's, an exclusive restaurant where secrets were shared over 200 steaks and loyalty was bought with aged wine. Victor greeted them like old friends. Olga was already seated, her smile polished, her eyes unreadable. "Let's skip the small talk," Abraham said, taking his seat. "Why are we really here?" Victor chuckled. "Straight to business, I respect that." He poured wine slowly, deliberately. "We want to make things right," he said. "No drama. No press, just closure." Abraham's eyebrow lifted. "Closure comes after the truth." Victor leaned in slightly. "What if I told you we could all win? The foundation stays intact. You become its global ambassador. Clarice receives a generous settlement. And Reed Luxury, well, we've secured $50 million in European expansion funding, all waiting on your signature." It sounded perfect, too perfect. And in return, Abraham asked, already knowing. Victor's eyes glinted. "You keep the past in the past. You forget the video, the ledger, Tina's condition. Everyone walks away comfortable." Clarice stiffened beside him. "And if we say no," Victor's smile vanished. "Then Reed Luxury's funding evaporates. Clarice loses her position. And the story of your unconventional paternity might just make the headlines," Olga added softly. "Your call, Abraham." He looked at them both, calm, controlled. This wasn't a dinner, it was a deal, and the check wasn't the only thing they expected him to sign. The sky over Door County was heavy with gray clouds as Abraham's car wound its way along a narrow road flanked by pine trees. The lake shimmered distantly beyond the trees, cold, vast, and unknowable. Clarice sat in the passenger seat silent for most of the drive. She clutched the velvet box with Nicholas's ring like it was a compass pointing home. "We're almost there," Abraham said quietly, more to himself than her. The GPS marked a single-pin Sanchez Lake House, a vacation property supposedly abandoned. But Tina's message had said otherwise. "Do you really think the ledger's still there?" Clarice asked. Abraham didn't take his eyes off the road. If she risked recording that video, she believed it was worth everything. They pulled up to the house just after noon. It was too perfect. Cedar siding, trimmed hedges, no signs of dust or decay. The kind of house that looked unlived in, not abandoned. A digital keypad blinked red beside the door. "What was it?" she said, Abraham murmured, tapping the keys. "My real birth date." He entered 06/17/1998. A soft click. The door opened into stillness. No alarm. No footsteps. Just the faint scent of lavender and lemon oil, like someone had been there recently. Clarice stepped in behind him, eyes wide. This place is like a showroom. They searched in silence, each room staged but hollow. No personal photos, no open books, just curated appearances. Until Abraham stopped in front of the master bedroom, an ornate headboard carved from dark wood. One section near the corner looked newer, shinier. He pressed it. Click. A panel slid open. Inside, a leather-bound ledger and a sealed envelope marked in delicate cursive, "To my grandson." Clarice gasped. Abraham reached in, hand steady. "This is it," he said. The truth wasn't buried. It had been waiting patiently, silently behind carved wood and locked doors, and now it had found its way home. Abraham laid the leather-bound book on the desk by the window, the cover etched with the Sanchez Foundation's crest, gilded pristine, a symbol of false philanthropy. Clarice stood beside him, barely breathing. He opened to the first page. The handwriting was elegant but sharp. Dates, names, dollar amounts, all carefully recorded. Tina hadn't just kept a diary. She had built a case. "Look at this," Abraham said, flipping to an entry marked June 1998. 250,000. Dr. Robert Milner, consulting fee, 100,000. Beatrice Porter, discretionary compensation, establishment of shell entity, Greystone Medical Holdings. Clarice's voice trembled. "That's the month you were born," Abraham nodded, "and the month they stole my father's research." More pages revealed layers of financial maneuvering, offshore accounts, fraudulent grants funneling money from medical patents through shell charities. Victor and Olga hadn't just separated a child from his mother. They had built an empire on it. Abraham's fingers tightened on the ledger. "All these years," he said softly, "they used me, funded themselves off my father's work, off your pain." Clarice blinked back tears, and they kept Tina quiet, locked away while her name funded everything. Near the back of the ledger, entries turned recent foundation board votes, European investment funds, hush payments, and notes about Abraham's growing profile in luxury retail. "They were grooming me," he whispered, "positioning me to legitimize the final phase." Clarice picked up the envelope labeled "To my grandson." Inside was a handwritten letter. "My dear Abraham," she read aloud, "if you're reading this, then I failed to stop them, but you still can." The final line was underlined, "The truth they buried with your name will be their undoing." The room fell silent again, but it wasn't empty anymore. It echoed with a new sound, justice sharpening its blade. The envelope arrived by courier. No return address, just Abraham's name typed neatly across the front. He hesitated before opening it. Inside, a folded letter and a sealed DNA report. Clarice leaned over his shoulder as he read the cover page. Paternity analysis, subjects Abraham Reed and Nicholas Brownell, result exclusion. Abraham read the words again, and again. "No genetic match," he murmured. Clarice's hands flew to her mouth. "That's not possible." The letter was short, unsigned, typed surgical. "Nicholas Brownell was not your biological father. The man your mother loved, yes, but not the man who gave you life. You are not who you think you are, and neither is she." Clarice stumbled backward, visibly shaking. "No, this is a lie. There was never anyone else." Abraham sat down hard. The weight of the revelation, or the illusion of it, felt like being hit by a truck. But then he looked closer. The lab listed on the report Dynagene Private Services, a company Abraham knew had been shut down 3 years ago for falsifying court documents. He checked the watermark. Wrong font, wrong seal. His jaw clenched. "It's fake," he said. "Sloppy, too." Clarice exhaled a relief mixing with outrage. "Why would he do this? To shake us," Abraham replied. "If he can cast doubt on my father, he weakens my legal claim. If he can pit us against each other, we fracture." He stood suddenly calm. "This isn't just a power move. It's desperation." Clarice met his gaze. "Then we don't flinch." He nodded slowly. They'd seen Victor's opening move, and now it was time to make theirs. Sandra's voice was breathless on the phone. "They broke in," she said. "The archives, everything's gone." Abraham gripped the steering wheel tighter. "What do you mean, gone? I came in this morning." The storage locker was wide open. Tina's hospital records, Victor's signed authorizations, the financial trail. "I printed all of it. Missing." Clarice, sitting beside him, turned pale. "Do they know you helped us?" "I don't think so," Sandra whispered. "But someone wanted to wipe the slate clean." Abraham's mind spun. Security footage hard drive stolen. They knew exactly what to take. They hung up. Silence sat thick in the car. "They're escalating." Abraham muttered, "Fast." Clarice looked out the window. "They're trying to erase us again." They pulled into Abraham's condo garage 20 minutes later, only to find the elevator already on their floor. When they entered the apartment, everything looked untouched. Too untouched. Abraham checked the safe behind the bookshelf. Ledger gone. But something else was left behind, a Polaroid photo face down on the desk. He flipped it over. It was a picture of Clarice standing outside his building 2 nights ago. Blurry, zoomed in, taken from a distance. On the back, in red marker, "Some things stay buried for a reason." Clarice gasped. "They're watching us." Abraham's blood ran cold. This wasn't just intimidation. It was personal. A message hand-delivered in silence. "They don't want justice," he said, voice low. "They want obedience." Clarice placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice steady. "Then let's stop obeying." He nodded once. They had taken everything they could, paper photos, ledgers. But the truth was no longer hidden. It lived inside them now, and no one could steal it back. The law office was nothing like Abraham expected. No leather chairs, no marble floors, just a small room in a quiet brick building on the edge of downtown, low profile by design. "You're not here to make noise," said Elena Wu, the investigative attorney sitting across from him. "You're here to make impact." Abraham slid the last remaining copy of Tina's letter across the table. Elena scanned it without blinking. "She's alive," Abraham said, "being kept off-grid, likely sedated, all because she knew too much." "And now you know too much," Elena replied. Clarice added, "They've already started striking back. DNA fakes threats, break-ins. They're not going to stop." Elena leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. "You're not dealing with amateurs." Victor and Olga built a fortress out of Charity's false adoption records in shell companies. If you take this public, it'll get loud fast. But if your goal is exposure, we need to make it bulletproof. She slid a folder across the table. "Press conference, Monday. I've lined up 3 outlets, including 1 national. But we don't talk emotion. We talk evidence." Abraham opened the folder, prepared statements, projected Q&A, and a list of supporting parties, including whistleblowers Elena had quietly contacted from inside the Sanchez Foundation. 3 of Victor's board members are ready to speak, she said. They've suspected fraud for years. All they needed was a match to light the fuse. Clarice looked at Abraham. "This is the match," she said. He nodded. No more whispers, no more shadows, no more stolen files, hidden mothers, or rewritten DNA. It was time to flip the script, because sometimes the only way to silence a lie is to say the truth loud enough for the whole world to hear. The lights were too bright. Abraham stood at the podium, cameras flashing, microphones pointed like weapons. Behind him, Clarice and Elena sat tall. The Sanchez Foundation's crest loomed on a digital screen, its gold edge now tainted by everything they were about to say. He took a breath, and then he spoke. "My name is Abraham Reed, and for 25 years I lived under a lie. He recounted the story, his separation from Clarice, the falsified documents, Tina's secret recording, the ledger they tried to erase. Each word steady, every sentence deliberate. Reporters scribbled notes like fire. I was never abandoned, he said. I was stolen, used, groomed for a legacy built on theft. Then came Clarice, her voice trembling but clear, telling the story of a mother who never stopped looking, even when the world told her her baby had died. Applause followed. Questions rose. Elena stepped in with dates, statements, board names. The room was on fire with truth, until a voice called out from the back, "What about the third signature?" The room hushed. A man stepped forward, mid-40s, trench coat, worn eyes. He held a file in one hand, a cane in the other. Elena squinted. "That's Dr. Evan Milner," Clarice whispered. "The attending physician when I gave birth." Abraham froze. "Doctor?" Milner approached, slowly, eyes on Abraham. "I was part of it," he said. "I signed the release papers. I helped Victor fake the records. I've lived with it every day since." He placed the file on the podium. "Here are the original charts. The real ones. Blood types, test results, everything. Nicholas Brownell was his father. The DNA report Victor sent you fabricated. I saw it happen." The crowd erupted. Clarice gasped, but Dr. Milner didn't flinch. "I'm not here for forgiveness," he said, voice hoarse. "I'm here for the truth, before someone else decides I've lived too long to tell it." And just like that, the final wall cracked. The man who helped bury the truth had just dug it up with his own hands. The building emptied slowly, the air still charged with tension and camera flashes. Abraham stepped outside with Clarice and Elena at his side, hearts pounding, but proud. The city hadn't heard truth like that in a long time. Paparazzi shouted, reporters chased for quotes. Somewhere behind them, Der Milner was ushered into a black SUV by Elena's security team. Then came the sound no one expected. Boom! The shockwave hit before the noise did. A car exploded just across the street, fireball. Glass metal twisted midair. The heat hit Abraham's face like a punch. Screams erupted. Clarice fell to the ground. Elena pulled her into cover. Abraham stood, frozen ears, ringing, heart racing. A second later, 2 more cars blared their alarms. Smoke rose like a black flag. Sirens wailed in the distance. Abraham rushed forward, but Elena grabbed his arm. "Stop. That could have been meant for you." He stared at the wreckage. It was the same SUV Dr. Milner had been ushered into. Or was it? No plate, he muttered. Was that his car? Elena was already on her phone. "I don't think so. He's on the move in another vehicle. That one was a decoy." Clarice sat against the wall, trembling. "They're not backing down. They're escalating," Abraham said, breathless. This wasn't just a warning. This was a statement. A paramedic pushed past them. Police roped off the area. A small crowd gathered, whispering and filming. Elena looked Abraham dead in the eye. "This changes the game." "No," he said. "This is the game." He looked back at the fire, the chaos, the panic, and saw something chilling. On the ground next to the blast site was a charred photo. Tina Sanchez, alive, dated 4 days ago. Victor hadn't just tried to destroy the evidence, he tried to send a message. "If you keep digging, I'll burn everything you love." The photo changed everything. It wasn't just proof that Tina was alive, it was a map. On the back, half burnt but legible, were handwritten coordinates, rural land outside Madison, Wisconsin. A closed medical retreat once funded by the Sanchez Foundation. "She's there," Elena said, tapping the coordinates. "Off-grid. No traffic in or out for over a year. Staff records are sealed. And guess whose name is on the land deed?" Olga Sanchez, Abraham whispered. He looked up, jaw tight. "Then that's where we're going." Elena nodded. "We'll need gear, discreet transport, backup. This isn't a courtroom anymore. This is war." Clarice from the corner of the room stepped forward. "I'm coming too," she said. Abraham froze. "No, Mom. I lost her once," Clarice said quietly. "I won't lose her again." By nightfall, the plan was set. Abraham and Elena would arrive first in an unmarked SUV. Clarice and 2 private security agents hired by Elena's firm would arrive separately, posing as legal officials requesting access for foundation inspection. It was bold, risky, but it was their only shot. The road to the compound was narrow, surrounded by dense pine. The closer they got, the quieter the world became, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "We go in, get Tina, and get out," Elena said, voice steady. "No hero moves. We document everything. If she's under sedation or restraint, we record it." Abraham checked his phone, signal weak, almost gone. He looked out the window and whispered more to himself than anyone. "If they touched her..." Elena didn't answer. She just reached into the glove box and handed him a recording pen. "We'll get her back," she said. "But when we do, make them pay in truth, not fire." The car turned off, the road tires crunching gravel headlights, piercing the trees toward a place built to hide people and bury truth. The compound was silent, eerily clean, like a memory scrubbed too many times. Abraham moved down the corridor with Elena at his side, each door they passed sealed with biometric locks. Security was tighter than any hospital. This wasn't healthcare, it was containment. Room 307, that was the one. But standing in front of it, waiting like a queen in checkmate, was Olga Sanchez. Tall, composed, cold. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said. Abraham didn't flinch. "Where is she?" Olga tilted her head. "Alive. For now." Elena raised her phone, already recording. "You're holding a woman against her will. That's a federal offense." Olga smirked. "You think laws apply in places like this?" She stepped aside slowly. "You want the truth? Open the door. But know this, once you do, the world you knew ends. Everything becomes war." Abraham pushed past her. The room was dim, humming with quiet machines. And there, lying on a hospital bed beneath a thin blanket, Tina Sanchez, eyes open, breathing, weak but conscious. She turned slowly. Her eyes met Abraham's. "Grandson," she whispered. Clarice burst into the room a beat later, gasping. Tina smiled faintly. "Clarice, you look like him." Tears fell freely. Abraham looked around. IVs, sedatives, but no restraints. This wasn't just physical control, it was chemical silence. Behind them, Olga spoke. She asked to forget. "We helped." "No," Abraham growled. "You erased her because she remembered too much." He turned, stepping toward her. Elena blocked his path. "Not yet." Elena whispered. "Truth first. Revenge later." Abraham raised the recording pen. "You've lied, kidnapped, forged, stolen. But starting today, you speak to us on the record." Olga didn't resist. She simply smiled and said, "I hope you are ready, Abraham. Because everything you expose also exposes her." He froze. Elena frowned. "What does that mean?" Olga's eyes gleamed. "Your mother has secrets too, and not all of them are forgivable." The air in the recovery room was thick with unspoken things. Tina lay sleeping, her vitals steady. Clarice sat by her side, stroking her hand gently. Abraham stood near the window, but his gaze wasn't on the lake, it was on the words still echoing in his head. "Your mother has secrets too, and not all of them are forgivable." "What did she mean?" he asked, finally breaking the silence. Clarice didn't look up. "She's trying to manipulate you. She succeeded." Clarice's fingers tightened around Tina's. "There was a man," she said quietly, "before Nicholas. Just once. We were broken up. Angry, I was reckless. I never told him I was pregnant because I wasn't sure whose baby it was." Abraham felt the room shift under his feet. "So, you didn't know?" Clarice shook her head. "Not for sure. Not then. But Nicholas loved me anyway. Loved you." Abraham sat slowly, heart pounding. "Then why didn't you tell me any of this?" "Because I didn't want you to feel like a mistake," she whispered. The words sliced deep. "I spent my whole life trying to not be someone's mistake." Tears rolled down her cheeks now. "You weren't. You were the only thing I got right." Abraham stood up, pacing. "All this time I thought Victor was the liar. But you lied too. You let me build my identity on half-truths." Clarice stood, crossing the room. "I lied to survive," she said, "to protect you, to hold on to any version of love I could find after they took you." Abraham turned away, fists clenched. He wasn't sure what hurt more, the deception or how familiar it felt. Because sometimes when the truth finally arrives, it doesn't set you free. It asks if you're strong enough to stay. The courtroom was quiet, not the chaotic, headline-hungry arena Victor had hoped for, but a closed federal hearing, quiet, clinical final. Tina sat in the front row, her hands warm in Clarice's. Elena stood beside Abraham, stacks of documents in front of her ledgers, transcripts, forged birth certificates, and the full testimony of Der Evan Milner. Victor and Olga sat opposite, emotionless, still powerful but no longer in control. The judge flipped through the pages. Mr. Reed, you've been given a choice. You may proceed with a full criminal trial or settle for a permanent injunction, asset redistribution, and sealed records. This would protect your privacy, but it would also win the public inquiry. Abraham looked around the room, at Tina fragile but smiling, at Clarice shaken, flawed but whole, at himself no longer a boy searching for a name but a man deciding what legacy to leave behind. He took a breath. I choose light, he said, not for vengeance, for truth. The judge nodded. And the statement to the press, Abraham looked to Elena. Then back to the bench. Tell them my name is Abraham Reed, son of Clarice, grandson of Tina. I was born into a lie, but I've chosen to live in truth. Outside, the crowd was waiting. Abraham stepped into the sunlight, cameras flashing. Reporters swarmed. He didn't flinch. Clarice reached for his hand. I was scared you'd walk away, she said. I almost did, he replied. She squeezed gently. So why didn't you? He looked at her, then at Tina, then up at the sky. Because for the first time I know who I am, and I wouldn't trade that for any version of the past. Some stories end with justice, others with peace. But the rarest ones, they end with both earned, not given. And that was Abraham Reed's legacy. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it also heals. We all come from stories we didn't choose, family secrets, betrayals, and unanswered questions that shape who we are. Abraham Reed's journey reminds us that the truth may not always feel safe, but it's the only thing that can set us free. When we dare to uncover what's been hidden, whether it's in our past, our family, or ourselves, we give healing a chance. Even when the truth is painful, it holds the power to reconnect us with our roots and reshape our future. This story teaches us that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over punishment, clarity over bitterness. And most of all, it reminds us that identity is not something others define for us, it's something we claim with courage. So if you're facing a difficult truth, lean into it. If your past feels broken, know that truth is the first brick to building something whole. Because light once chosen never stops revealing the path forward.